you've been watching our content for quite some time, you'll know that we don't tend to do huge amounts of content on motherboards, but instead like to focus more on doing the ultimate roundup of motherboards, which generally takes a very, very long time and leaves us at the mercy of motherboard vendors and actually sending us as many motherboards as possible to make it the most comprehensive motherboard roundup on the planet. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. Hello mate, you alright? Yeah, just got all the bits from my banging new gaming PC. Just got to put it together. It's going to be so much better than yours. Oh, right. What did you get then? The latest Intel 12th gen processor, a feature-packed motherboard, and 32 gig of DDR4 memory. See? Miles ahead of yours. You realise that board needs DDR5 memory, don't you? Don't tell me you went and bought the wrong stuff. DDR4 is so 2014. I can't believe you was that stupid. What? No, you're joking. What should I get then? For me, I'd be looking at Corsair's newest Vengeance DDR5 kits, or if you're wanting that all-important RGB, then go for the Dominator Platinum RGB. Oh, you are a lifesaver, thanks, but where can I find out more? By clicking the link in the description below, of course. And you call me the stupid one. So since the launch of X670E from AMD and even Z790 from Intel, we had a lot of internal discussions about motherboard testing, along with getting feedback from all of you about how we actually conduct things, and the general consensus was that we completely ditch productivity and gaming benchmarking and focus more on the things that matter, which comes down to features, pricing, and VRM testing. Now, for the most part, if you're comparing motherboards and using the same CPU, GPU, and memory, well, you're going to find, unless something is seriously wrong, likely down to the BIOS or just being a completely subpar product, that all boards on the same chipset should perform, within the same range of each other, which really, for the average consumer, well, shows absolutely nothing. A motherboard is never going to give you extra performance per se, though if the likes of the VRM temperatures are actually under control, it can certainly make a difference with levels of boost on your CPU, along with providing clean, stable power, not only for stock performance, but of course for overclocking as well. So if you were hoping to see a bunch of pointless charts and data and results, sadly you won't see them here, because they really are completely 100% redundant. Now, while we did reach out to all of the main brands on the market who make motherboards, ASRock never replied, so you won't see anything here for them. But I'd like to think that we have the most popular boards that sport the X670E chipset from ASUS, Gigabyte, and MSI. Now, in total, we have 7 boards, and we will touch on the design and features of each of them before jumping into the all-important VRM testing. Now, in terms of the motherboards, because they are X670E and not just the bog standard X670 chipset, they are all on the, let's say, higher end of the scale in terms of features and who they're aimed at, of course. And then the most important thing, price. And we will go through them in price order, as some of the models are very similar from rival competitors. So that should give you an insight as to kind of what's the best one to choose specific for your needs. So kicking things off with the cheapest board we have, and that's the ASUS Prime X670E Pro Wi-Fi, which is definitely going to appeal to a lot of people due to the style and the design with a predominantly silver and somewhat champagne colour scheme. For a board of this calibre though, ASUS have definitely stepped up their game with boot LEDs for troubleshooting, dual EPS power connectors, and a 14+2 power phase rated at 70 amps per stage. The board also includes a PCI Express Gen 5 slot for your graphics card, along with a total of 4 M.2 slots, of which one is ready for Gen 5 devices as well. What's also nice to see is features that we've only ever seen on the super high end, like the Q release button, so you're not fumbling between your CPU cooler and backplate of your toasty GPU in the hope of releasing it. Now, heatsink wise, the Prime definitely looks to be ample, with 2 separate blocks helping keep things at bay, with the larger of the two moulding into that large I/O shroud, with a built-in backplate. Again, it seems ASUS have really upped their game here, incorporating some high-end features like that, even on a lower priced motherboard. Next up is the ASUS ROG Strix X670E iGaming Wi-Fi, which is a little confusing as it is X670E, but is the I variant, meaning that it's mini ITX, and is actually the only mini ITX X670E board on the market from any brand. What's funny is that every generation sees mini ITX boards, though they are small form factor, rise in height due to the ability of adding new features without adding beyond the mini ITX form factor. Those unique features include the dual stacked M.2 slots, which includes a PCI Express 5.0 slot along with a Gen 4 slot as well, which sits comfortably next to the single PCI Express 5.0 slot for your GPU. Along with this is a riser card known as the ROG FPS2 card, which gives SATA connectivity along with various USB and front panel headers, again while also saving on space. Beyond that, there's also the ROG Strix Hive, which is a separate breakout unit that can sit on your desk or case and give some well-known ROG features, including QLEDs, BIOS flashback button, USB ports, and multimedia connectivity and controls. Now, while this is the smallest board we have, it doesn't skimp out when it comes to the VRMs, with a 10+2 power phase design, with each stage rated for a whopping 110 amps of concurrent power, which are all cooled by a single large heatsink that merges into the rear I/O, which also houses a single small fan which exhausts heat away out of the rear I/O panel. Around the same price, at least in the US, is the Gigabyte X670E AORUS Master. Now, I've always been a massive advocate of the Master boards, as they typically offer amazing value for money in terms of design, features, and what they have to offer, and this board is no different in those departments. For that money, you get an eATX size board with a bucket load of features, including all of the usual X670E based stuff like 2.5G Ethernet, Wi-Fi 6E, and a ton of super fast USB ports. But on top of that, you get a total of 3 full-size X16 PCI Express ports, of which the top one is PCI Express 5.0 ready, along with 4 M.2 slots, of which 2 are PCIe Gen 5 for those blistering fast speeds. In terms of the design, Gigabyte have gone big, with most of the board covered by a large, albeit stylish, set of heatsinks, which will aid in cooling as well, which is important for the 16+2+2 power phase design that's been included, which incorporates a very beefy setup comprising of 105 amp power stages for the cleanest and most stable power possible. To keep things under control temperature-wise, Gigabyte have stuck with their fins Array 3 design and 8mm mega heat pipe, which from previous generations definitely does the job it needs to. Moving up the stack in terms of price, we move back to ASUS with the ROG Strix X670E gaming Wi-Fi, which does go for a more stealthy and understated look that we've come to expect with the e-gaming lineup of boards over the generations. It's not all style over substance though, as the e-gaming Wi-Fi includes some cool features, like the Q release button for the top PCI Express slot, of which along with the second slot are both PCI Express 5 ready, while the third slot is PCI Express 4.0 compliant. On top of that, the board has a total of 4 M.2 slots, of which the top 2 also both support PCI Express 5 drives, for when they finally hit the market. For the all-important VRMs, ASUS have gone big using an 18+2 based Digi+ power phase setup, consisting of 110 amps of continuous power per stage, and their infamously named ProCool 2 dual 8-pin power connectors. Still not a fan of the name. Now, to keep temperatures at bay, ASUS have opted for 2 large heatsinks around the CPU socket, which are connected by a large heat pipe to help spread the heat around for the very best cooling. Now, as we move up into the more expensive realm of boards, we start things off with the Gigabyte X670E AORUS XTREME, which, I'll be honest, isn't for the faint-hearted due to its price point, but at the same time is one of the best looking boards on the market. Though I think I preferred the design on the previous generation Extreme boards with more of the PCB covered and right angle connectors, which is kind of what made the Extreme stand out in the first place. That aside, the design is beefy, especially towards the rear I/O of the board, which covers over some of the VRM cooling. Feature-wise, as expected, the board is ready for PCI Express 5.0 graphics through one of the 3 PCI Express X16 slots, along with PCI Express 5.0 M.2 drives on all 4 of the M.2 slots, which is pretty impressive, as most boards generally only utilise one M.2 slot supporting the faster upcoming drives. All of these super fast features require a lot of power, and Gigabyte have you covered there too, with an 18+2+2 digital power setup, with each phase providing 105 amps of continuous power. To keep this cool at all times, Gigabyte have gone with their latest advanced thermal design, consisting of a large 8mm heat pipe, fins Array 3 with nanocarbon coating, and nanocarbon aluminium backplate as well. For the same price, another option you have is to go for the MSI MEG X670E Ace, which is one of the more, let's say, unique choices of boards on the market due to its black and gold colour scheme, which also adds a level of premium styling to the market. Now, while the Ace forms part of the MEG lineup, it sits just below the Godlike, which is MSI's top tier motherboard for the X670E chipset. Now, with its eATX form factor, it's allowed MSI to cram in features like the 3 X16 expansion slots, of which the top 2 both support Gen 5 speeds, along with the 4 M.2 slots, of which the one next to the DIMM slots, which is an unusual location to say the least, also supports the faster PCI Express 5 technology, for those wanting unparalleled performance. Though it doesn't just stop there, as the Ace also bundles in an M.2 Expander Z Gen 5 dual expansion card for an extra 2 PCI Express 5.0 slots. Now, being a top tier motherboard means that MSI haven't skimped anywhere, especially so on the power phases, which incorporates a 22+2+1 stage design with 22 phases just for the V-core, of which all are rated at 90 amps each and are powered by twin 8-pin EPS connectors. The cooling is pretty hefty too, with a stacked fin array design, a direct touch heat pipe which connects the 2 heatsinks, along with a MOSFET backplate and large backplate to help with the rigidity of the board, as well as helping to evenly distribute heat away from the phases as well. Lastly, if money is no object, then you have the ASUS ROG Crosshair XTREME, which is their flagship motherboard for this chipset. It's stacked with features and a design that's perfect for those wanting a premium looking board with plenty of flashing lights, though it can be turned off if it's not for you. Most of the board is covered by heatsinks and mixed materials, and the whole right side of the eATX board is right angled for the very best in cable management. Expansion slot wise, it includes 2 X16 slots and a single X4 slot, of which both of the X16 slots are PCIe 5.0 ready, along with a total of 5 M.2 slots, with 2 onboard slots on the board itself, 2 on the ROG Gen Z.2 riser module, weird name but it does the trick, and a 5th on the bundled PCI Express 5.0 M.2 card. Out of these 5 slots, a total of 4 of them are Gen 5 ready, with only 1 on the riser module being Gen 4 compatible. But in all honesty, who's going to be running that many Gen 5 drives when they do finally drop anyway? The power delivery is extreme, just like the board, with teamed power stages which operate in a 20+2 configuration, which are rated at 110 amps each, along with the ASUS Pro-Cool 2 power connectors that feed the power to the top part of the board and to the CPU. To keep the phases under control, there's an embedded heat pipe which angles from the top of the board towards the I/O, with 2 large heatsinks that heat dissipates the heat away, along with the steel backplate that's bolted to the rear of the board to assist not only with temperatures, but to strengthen the board as well. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought on what board might be right for you in terms of design, features, and that all important price. But there are other areas that are worth looking at. But before we do, it's worth talking about the test configuration, which consisted of the Ryzen 9 7900X processor, as at the time of testing the 7950X wasn't available to us. Memory wise, we use Corsair's Dominator Platinum DDR5 32GB 5200MHz memory, and for the GPU we use the Palette RTX 3080 GameRock. Everything was housed inside the NZXT H7 Flow case with an NZXT Z73 RGB for consistency, with the stock fan configuration of a single 120mm fan in the front and the same in the rear, while the Z73 is installed at the top with its triple fan setup. We made sure that our room was at 24 degrees plus or minus 1 degree throughout our testing, and sadly we don't have air conditioning to keep it any cooler. And then for our readings, we used the Akazon 4-channel K-type thermocouple thermometer for VRM temperatures, which were fixed to the rear of the boards and reported the peak temperature. Along with this, for power measurements, we used the GW Instec GPM 8212 AC power meter for the very best accuracy. Also for our power and VRM testing, we used Prime 95 for a prolonged amount of time to put as much stress under the CPU for a somewhat worst case scenario type test. So first things first is to look at boot times, because as we know, X670E and AM5 in general for that matter isn't the quickest platform on the market due to memory training. So with each board set up using the same components and set to their default BIOS settings, we performed a cold boot on each to see how long it would take to get to the first instance of loading Windows. And the results were quite interesting, with the more expensive and feature-packed boards all taking longer than the rest of the stack. The worst board for boot time was the Gigabyte AORUS XTREME at a whopping 51 seconds, followed closely behind by the ASUS ROG Crosshair XTREME at 47 seconds total. As we move further down the list, we can see some quite big jumps into the mid-tier, with the Gigabyte AORUS Master coming in the quickest at just 24 seconds, which is a much more acceptable number in the grand scheme of things. Now we do have tons of other charts for each board in a variety of tests like TimeSpy, ADA64 memory test, Cinebench, PCMark, SuperPi, and a bunch of the latest game titles. And we will be putting all that good stuff up on our Patreon for our members to look at there, as we don't see it as like I mentioned in the start, the most crucial piece of information to display here, due to the only variable being the motherboard itself, which doesn't really affect performance too much in the first place. Now, the other key area to look at is of course VRMs, because this is where I guess things do get pretty interesting. Now, to start with, it's worth noting that even after a prolonged Prime 95 run, which is worst case scenario, none of the boards peaked above 65 degrees, which what I'm trying to say is a huge step up from X570, which in comparison ran fairly hot. Now, as we look at the results, at idle, everything was very similar, with the Mini ITX board, as expected, coming out as the warmest, while at load, things did actually shift about a bit, with the higher end boards coming in with the best VRM temperatures. The only outlier here was the MSI Ace board, which, while it was warmer than the likes of the two Extreme boards from ASUS and Gigabyte, was still at a very respectable 56 degrees. Now, the Gigabyte AORUS Extreme did come in the best though, at 41 degrees Celsius, followed closely by the Crosshair Extreme at 42 degrees. Now, also as expected, the hottest board was the Mini ITX board from ASUS, but even at 65 degrees, it's well within safe limits and would encounter no thermal throttling across your system anyway, and really is only higher due to the smaller form factor that it encompasses. Either way, I think it's clear to see that whatever board you choose to go with, you're going to have no problems with thermals, even when pushing your CPU to the limits through overclocking, as every brand has done a great job of keeping things under control, even when looking at the likes of Prime 95, which, as I mentioned, does paint a picture well beyond what the average user is likely to experience anyway. Another area I was keen to look at comes down to total system power consumption, as each result only has one changing variable, which is the board itself. So it's easy to see what kind of difference it can make when choosing what board is right for you. Now, as expected, at idle, the Mini ITX board uses the least amount of power, with our system sitting at just 78 watts total, while the Crosshair Extreme system used the most at 121 watts idle. Now, as we put the systems through that Prime 95 run, the Crosshair stays at the top of our stack at 291 watts, while the E-Gaming comes in the most efficient at 271 watts. Now, typically speaking, the higher end boards do require more power, though Gigabyte's AORUS boards stand out here as they actually use around 10 to 15 watts less compared to the competition. Now, what this means for cost is there really isn't much between each of the boards, all coming in with a total system cost of around 4 cents per hour at load. So what I'm trying to say is the cost of running them doesn't really come into play much, and instead you'd have a better choice to make based on the cost of the board in the first place and if it offers up the features that you actually need for your system. It's very much the same story in the UK, where electricity prices are a little bit higher, but with a total system per hour cost of around 9 pence per board, with less than a penny between the most efficient board and the board that required the most power to run, there's not really much in it. So again, if you are in the UK, there's other deciding factors you can make when choosing the board that's right for you. So there you have it. I think it's clear to see that X670E as a whole is a great success. They all perform about the same in your normal benchmarking and game tests, but then when it actually matters, they all get a big check mark for having decent features and those all important VRM temperatures. You're probably now wondering what one to go for based on my own findings and, more importantly, what one I'd choose, as it's still a pretty tough decision to make. Now, if you want to go small form factor, you have to choose the ASUS Mini ITX gaming board because it's the only ITX board on the market. So ASUS kind of have that one cornered. That aside, I think it's clear to see that every board has its place depending on the budget you have and features. But it's hard to ignore the likes of the AORUS Master, which for the money is an amazing product. Though of course, if you want more and money is no object, either of the ASUS Extreme or AORUS Extreme boards will be amazing, but will cost you a pretty penny. But I don't feel like you're getting ripped off with them. That's the kind of key important thing. Yeah, mass amounts of Gen 5 M.2 support, great quality products. What I'm trying to say is it's not all smoke and mirrors. You really are getting something for your money. And the same can be said of the MSI Ace as well, which certainly has the award for being the most unique looking, if that's what you're after, while also utilising an interesting design when looking at the M.2 placement and that expansion card to give you access to more drives. Now, I will be as bold to say that I think this is the first chipset launch, at least in a very, very long time, where I don't really have anything bad to say. Every brand featured here have kind of really stepped up their game for this chipset, and it shows. And And while I would have liked to have had a larger stack of boards available to me, as I mentioned, that just wasn't possible, as the likes of ASRock didn't even bother to get back to us, so their loss, I guess. Luckily, with the boards that we did have, all 7 of them, yeah, I want to say they're probably the most popular out there and the ones that you guys and girls are probably eyeing up anyway. So hopefully this video has given you kind of some food for thought. It took us long enough to test and get all this data into one place. And yes, for anyone who's wondering, because we have seen all of the comments, we will be doing something similar to this for B650, Z790 and B760. So make sure you're subscribed for that. That aside, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, then a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing. And if you love what we do and want to see even more testing data, then be sure to head on over to our Patreon, where you'll get access to that among tons of other cool and exclusive benefits, like our monthly Q&A live stream, exclusive game nights, and access to our special area on Discord. The link for all that good stuff is down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.